Okay, you've got two basic types of hormones, and they're classified by their chemical structure. If they're made of amino acids, anywhere from one to a whole chain of them, even to a protein, then they are called amino acid hormones, and usually these are hydrophilic. So the receptors they bind to are going to be in the plasma membrane of the target cell. And then there's the steroid hormones that are derived from cholesterol, and these are usually hydrophobic. And the receptors they bind to are generally in the cytosol and the nucleus. Now, if we look at these hydrophilic hormones a little bit more, they're a little different. We think of the hydrophilic hormone as the first messenger. And that hydrophilic hormone will bind to this plasma membrane. Okay? The plasma membrane, let me change that color, I'm sorry. Bind to the plasma membrane here, receptor in the target cell. And what that does, that activates this peripheral protein. A G protein is an example of that. And that G protein will activate an enzyme that will make a second messenger that will cause some changes in the cell. And here as examples, adenylate cyclase, that is a enzyme that the G protein second messenger system activates, and it causes a second messenger cyclic adenosine monophosphate. And then that causes activation of protein kinases, eventually leading to the transfer of a phosphate group to ADP to make ATP, or phosphorylation is what the process is called. Now, the hydrophobic hormones, they are derived from cholesterol, and the receptors for these are going to be in the cytosol or the nucleus. And they are going to interact with the receptor there. And usually they will target the DNA of the cell, and they can affect protein synthesis. So you got the amino acid and the steroid hormones that can be hydrophilic, usually the amino acids, hydrophobic if it's the steroids. Now, what do hormones do? What are some of the effects? They can stimulate secretion from an endocrine or an exocrine cell. They can activate or inhibit enzymes, stimulate or inhibit mitosis and or meiosis. They open and close ion channels in the cell's membrane so they can change membrane potential. If you remember what that was from 201 with your muscle cells and your nervous cells. And they can affect gene expression. They can control what DNA is doing. So those are all actions of your hormones. Now, how do we regulate our hormone secretion? We can either inhibit it or initiate it. And there's three ways this can happen. First is hormonal stimuli, where you have some hormones released or some secretions released, and that will increase secretion or decrease secretion from target cells of the hormone, where another hormone tells them to secrete more or less of their hormone. For example, the hypothalamus tells the pituitary which hormone to secrete and whether to secrete more or less of it in order to affect cells all over the body. Humoral secretion or humoral stimuli, that's going to have to do with fluids in the body. A concentration of an ion or a molecule that's in the blood or the extracellular fluid. We make insulin, our pancreas does, because there isn't enough glucose in our blood. That's an example of humoral stimuli. Neural stimuli is when the endocrine cells respond to signals from the sympathetic nervous system. Now, it's all regulated by negative feedback loops. They get the signal to create an action or to negate the signal, and they continue to do so in a loop until we get it back to normal range. The stimulus is this regulated physiological variable, and it gets out of its normal range. It deviates from its normal range. A receptor that's on the target cell detects that deviation and tells the control center. Oftentimes the control center is an endocrine cell, and it tells it needs to increase or decrease the secretion of this particular hormone. And then that hormone elicits some sort of response in the target cell, which is the effector response. And that's moving it back towards the normal range. So that variable, we want to keep it within its homeostatic range. And as soon as we decrease the response, we get it back into normal range and the feedback loop shuts down. Now, different interactions of hormones, they have to interact in order to maintain homeostasis. Sometimes they complement each other, where different hormones from different glands will affect a different target cell to achieve a common goal. Like the hormones that come from the adrenal gland and from the pancreas, they work together during exercise to maintain homeostasis. Sometimes they're synergists. They also work together. They will affect the same target cell, and so the effect is more pronounced. It's a greater effect. Estrogen and progesterone work as synergists to cause the release of the egg. Sometimes they work as antagonists. They work on the same cells, but they have opposite effects. Insulin works on the to store sugar. It comes from the pancreas. Glucagon also comes from there to release sugar. So they have different effects, but they work on the same cells to cause those effects. Now, there's two types of hormones in your body. There's the tropic and the trophic with the H. The tropic hormones will control secretion of hormones from other endocrine glands, like the hypothalamus controls what the anterior pituitary releases, and it controls what the ovary does. That's tropic hormones. But then there are also trophic hormones, which cause growth in your target cells. And this would be like anterior pituitary hormones that cause growth, the growth hormone to be secreted. So that would be a trophic hormone. And sometimes hormones have tropic and trophic effects.